Okay. Hello, everybody. Here is Jacinta, and we are starting one more lecture like we do every month, uh, trying to sort out themes according to Spiritism, but also connected to the contemporary world we live in. So we will today talk about compulsive behaviors, dependencies, and spiritual liberation. We will have a study proposing to understand the mechanisms that imprison the will and the possible paths toward liberation. The central question is not only what does the person use or repeat, but also what they are trying to escape from, to feel, to control, or to numb. In this study, we connect classical Spiritist foundations with contemporary references on habits, suffering, dependence, and integral care. First of all, we have to define exactly what it is addiction. We have to choose carefully the words because we have a lot of prejudice, we have a lot of weight in these words. So the dictionary defines addiction as a dependence on the consumption of something, a bad habit, or a physical or psychological need for a substance. Then this describes the condition, but we have to describe the condition without reducing the person to this. And we have to preserve moral responsibility without humiliation. To do this, it's necessary to dissociate the idea of addiction from the social concepts of right or wrong, ethical or immoral. For example, in some countries, it is forbidden to consume alcoholic beverages, but it is acceptable for a man to marry 3 or 4 women. In other countries, it's the opposite. Drinking is naturally accepted, while multiple marriage would be against the law. So we can see that the human concept of addiction or something that is wrong is different from society to society. Therefore, we choose to define addiction with more modern and comprehensive words like dependence, or a person with dependence with or problematic use, a person facing problematic use of substance or whatever, compulsive behavior, which describes action that cannot be controlled, or a repetitive pattern that steals the freedom. So from now on, we can see the person in a different way than an addict with an addiction. We can have concepts that say a person in a process of compulsion, in a process of imprisonment and liberation, in a person in suffering, which is very clear for us. So what do we understand by dependence today? Contemporary understanding distinguish occasional use, risky use, dependence, and compulsive behaviors, recognizing different degrees, contexts, and patterns. It's very important for us to understand the differences between these categories because we usually put everything inside the same box and we judge and we criticize on the same level. But there are very different positions for this risky use, dependence, compulsive behaviors, and etc. So, not every excess constitutes a clinical dependence, but every repetitive pattern that steals freedom, disorganizes life, it is produce suffering and deserves a serious attention. So now when we start talking about this, that's why I didn't bring only the spiritist view. We have to consider the biological, the emotional, the social, and the environmental, aside the spiritual factors. In why we are talking about this today? Because compulsive behaviors cut across different age groups, social classes, and religious context, appearing both in classic forms and in expressions of the modern world. Substances, you can see that now addiction or dependence, it's not only related to the substances. More than this, there are the games, the online betting, social media in many forms, pornography, shopping, food, and overwork. Then people are having burnouts. From the Spiritist point of view, dependence should not be treated as a negative moral label. Compassion begins with a look free of contempt. Responsibility begins when change stops being outsourced, when we want the change to come from outside. The spiritual being is a whole that unites spirit, perispirit, and material body. That's why this graphic here shows we are a multidimensional being. We have the biological, psychological, social, environmental, functional, and spiritual sides of ourselves. So we cannot look at any problem or difficulty we have only treating the body or trying to treat the spirit because everything is connected. Here we start differentiating the levels of dependency. Occasional use is not the same as harmful use. Abuse appears when there is recurring harm, increased risk, or frequent loss of control. Dependence tends to include craving, tolerance, compulsive use despite harm, difficulty stopping, and a life focus on this object of your dependency. And compulsive behaviors can occur even without a chemical substance, when the repeated act comes to function as a rigid emotional regulator. Soon in the next slides, we will see that compulsive behaviors are far from being only connected to substances. Now we are separating the topics. We're talking about substances now: alcohol, tobacco, nicotine in vaping, illicit drugs, and medications used without medical guidance remain important sources of illness and loss of autonomy. Consumption often begins in contexts of curiosity, group belonging, relief or of anxiety, or attempts at emotional self-regulation. That's why it's so common for the young people to start using substances or seeking for different things because when we are young, especially, we want to belong to a group. We want to experiment new things and discover new things. And the group usually incentive us to start doing something different than we know. And also, we want to relieve the anxiety and try to regulate our emotions. So it's a very easy way to slip into this world. Over time, what seemed like an occasion choice can become the organizing axis of your routine, your mood, and your sociability. Other forms of imprisonment includes behaviors, online games and betting, which is very common nowadays, social media, pornography, compulsive shopping, food, and overwork now make up a broad field of behavior addictions. These patterns are reinforced by constant availability, persuasive design, immediate reward, and the promise of quick relief. That's the main problem on these things because they design a very attractive product that brings a lot of subliminal messages. You barely see that this is trying to catch your attention and involve you in a beautiful world full of rewards, which in fact are not real, but you will only see after you are already taken like this man. His risks are not by the cell phone because they are often socially accepted they can remain invisible for longer, and despite producing real wear and tear, the dopamine hormones that they can trigger are very fast, and you feel immediately a relief. Afterwards, you will feel the other problems. Then screen addiction, online gaming compulsion, and the incessant use of digital stimuli show that many times we are not simply facing entertainment, but repeated attempts to relieve emptiness, anxiety, loneliness, and inner disconnection. The WHO, which is the World Health Organization, recognizes gaming disorder when there is loss of control, increasing priority given to gaming over other areas of your life, and continuation despite harm. Chronic boredom, which is also a big problem between the young, especially, but not only. Chronic boredom also deserves attention. It is not always a simple lack of something to do, but may reflect lack of meaning, disconnection, and difficulty remaining with oneself without seeking immediate relief in screens. This is something that the scientists are studying for the last maybe 20 years more than before, because the boredom syndrome is very common, and especially now, which when we are more and more connected to the social media than never before. So, in light of Spiritism, this choice can be understood as an attempt to externally fill an emptiness that calls for inner transformation. Kardec clarifies that passions and inclinations require effort, self-knowledge, and moral vigilance. Joana de Angelis, which is another spirit that writes a lot through the medium Divaldo Franco, warns us about the existential emptiness that material excesses cannot satisfy. Contemporary science also suggests that spirituality and religiosity, when lived in a healthy way, can favor meaning, emotional regulation, and better mental health outcomes. Then you can understand that spirituality can help organize the inner world and reduce the need for constant anesthetics that we seek outside. And spirituality is walking hand to hand with the most modern scientific discoveries about the suffering or about the emptiness our generation is carrying inside. I put here some references in the end also, and you can read more about this on the Spirit's book and in the Gospel According to Spiritism. Mental health and moral habits that also imprison. Mental and moral habits that also imprison. Beyond substances and behaviors, remember we separate the things that could produce dependence, not only substance behaviors, but also moral habits. Beyond substance and behaviors, there are mental and moral habits that also imprison. For example, chronic victimization, verbal aggressiveness, the need for approval, constant comparison, resentment, and cultivated negativity. Who could imagine that these things could be a prison for us? But you might know people around you that play these roles. It's very common in our society that we find people with uh, use a lot of verbal aggressiveness. We know people that constantly need the approval of others to validate themselves. We know people that compare to the others constantly, so they are always insecure and they are never sure about what to do. We know people, to not say ourselves many times, that carry resentment from others. So these also are these balances that we carry. And here, Joana de Angelis, in the book the integrated human being, she talks about this. The moral and emotional crisis of contemporary human beings, which stem from individual insecurity, including distrust, automatic aggression, resentment, hatred, and emotional instability, are in turn responsible for higher and more significant levels of discomfort and dissatisfaction, forming a vicious cycle that repeats itself, imprisoning the conscience and disturbing the emotional system. And again, Kardec on the Spirit's book questions the higher spirits. What is the most valuable virtue of all? And they answer, every virtue has its value because each one reveals a step on the good path. But there is special merit when the person consciously resists their own negative inclinations and chooses not to be carried away by them. This means that all of us, no matter what is the level of knowledge, we will have negative inclinations because all of us are spirits still in evolution. We are not evolved spirits yet. We are on our way, like everybody in humanity. So we have to fight constantly these tendencies we carry inside. And when Kardec says in the Gospel, according to Spiritism, how to recognize the true spiritist, he questions this and they answer, you will recognize them by the efforts they do to perfect themselves and every day trying to be a better person than tomorrow. And that's the only thing we can do. So we might have inclinations that will lead us to a kind of dependency or compulsion or behaviors that will damage our life. That's normal for everybody. Nobody escapes this in this life. But we have to fight them with our knowledge, the self knowledge, and also the knowledge that comes from the spirits, bringing clarity to our lives and helping us to know better or assess better the situation and decide what is better for us in that moment. These states may not receive the name of dependence, but they equally weaken the will. They fix consciousness in lower frequencies of repetition and compromise bonds. So now you understand why I call this kind of moral and mental habits also dependency. They will not be classified as these in the science, but they will also lower our frequencies and will compromise the bonds we have with others. In light of Spiritism, every repeated inclination that miseducates the soul and reduces inner freedom calls for self-knowledge, moral discipline, and spiritual vigilance. And again, Joanna says in the book Moral Laws of Life, aggressiveness must be disciplined through education. Impulses must subside to the higher expressions of the spirit, for what is not corrected now reappears as an adversary in the future, in the other lives. And we will have to deal with this. The more we postpone to learn about that situation, the more we are chained to this, like the figure shows, and we have to deal with this at some point in this life or the other. Now let's recognize a little bit of the emotional triggers and the psychic escape. Many compulsive behaviors intensify in the face of loneliness, boredom, shame, guilt, fear, frustration, trauma, or a sense of emptiness. All these words are very, very common in our world. You can see the posts on Instagram or the other social medias because there is not only bad things, there are many other people trying to carry on beautiful messages and motivational messages. And we can see that many people are seeking these now because the loneliness became an epidemic in the world. the frustration and the trauma and the sense of emptiness is very common around this world. In these cases, the problem is not only the object sought, but the psychic function it comes to fulfill. Then, when you seek for a substance or you opt for a behavior or you choose some compulsive thing, you are trying to fulfill or to distract or to numb or to feel or avoid contact with the pain you are carrying inside. This pain can come from the loneliness, from the shame, from the trauma, from the sense of guilt, or whatever things you carry since your childhood or since other lives. They call for something to numb or to anesthetize, and then you can survive one more day. Because if you don't use the knowledge to free you, you will constantly try to find other ways to be distracted. Immediate relief may create the illusion of a solution, although it often deepens suffering afterwards. You know, it's the same point when you drink too much, not that drink a little bit of wine or whatever you like is a problem, but when you drink too much, the next day you're gonna have a hangover. It's terrible. You feel headache or you feel nausea, you feel this and you feel that. The same should be with the substances you can use freely, but you will pay the price afterwards because they will bring a lot of suffering for sure. The brain develops a habit and intensively rewarding experiences activates circuits of pleasure. That's why we keep doing and doing and doing, because the brain is something that is connected to the rewarding experiences. When this is repeated, the brain learns shortcuts to seek the same relief with less effort. The brain is always trying to save energy and to preserve energy to protect our life. So when the brain learns that there are shortcuts, they will seek the same relief with less effort. Then tolerance, craving, and reduced interest in simple, stable, and healthy experience may arise, making them seem less stimulating. For example, a study discovered that pizza is a food that gives you instant dopamine, which is happiness in a plate. And when you learn this and you don't have other options because you don't learn different things or you don't seek for different things or you don't have conscience of the consequences, you will try to eat pizza every day, which the young people are doing a lot these days because they will try to make it easy for you. And what happens is then when you will have other options that are healthier or that are calmer or that are different from this immediate satisfaction, you will think this is no, this is boring. I don't want to do this anymore because this is very low stimulating for me. And then you get to this vicious cycle, and it's really hard to get off this. Thus, dependence is not simply a matter of, oh, this person likes this. She does this or he does this because he likes. It's not about liking something a lot. It reorganizes expectations, impulses, and priorities. Then this stage is when you start repeating things, your brain is working for you. It's not only about, I like this substance, or I like this game, or I like to do this and that. Your game is already wired on this and keep repeating the same things to bring you the same stimuli. And then you fall in the cycle of dependence. For this reason, a person often sincerely promises to stop and then relapses, not because of falsehood or lack of will, but because the circuit has already gained psychological and behavioral strength. Pain triggers the search. Momentary relief reinforces repetition, and guilt generates new pain. Because this is very common with people with dependencies. They search a relief, but then they feel guilty after the effect passes, and they start doing it again to numb the pain again. Breaking this pattern requires intervention at several points in the cycle and not merely isolated good intentions. That's why it's not enough only uh, spiritual treatments or physical treatments or psychological treatments. Everything should work together because we are multidimensional beings, like I said before. The spiritual consequences in our practical life and the relationships is immense. The impacts are not only physical. Attention, sleep, mood, and emotional instability are the physical symptoms. They encompass a large array: eroding bonds, which is the relationship we have with friends and family, eroding our self esteem, our finances, our productivity, our trust, and family life can be deeply affected. The person begins to organize their life around the next moment of relief. Dependence tends to narrow horizons. Life becomes smaller than the soul needs. Spiritually, dependence weakens the will and favors automatisms that enslave the spirit to matter and immediacy, which means you forget about the higher things. You forget about transcendental things. You forget about God or prayer or help. You are only connected to the material world. And it is this enslaving quality of the substances, not only substance, but behaviors as well. When consciousness becomes accustomed to escape, it postpones necessary confrontations, moral repair, and intimate maturation. Maturity comes after we stop for a moment and think about the problem. And even if it's not agreeable, if it's not pleasant, we will face the consequences of our choices, which is very difficult. This is not divine punishment, but only consequence. The spirit reaps the effects of what it feeds within itself. Then there is another uh, layer in this observation because we believe in the spiritual world. If we know there are spirits influencing people, it will be good spirits and it will be also disbalance and bad spirits. And when we open the door to this kind of dependencies or compulsive behaviors, we will attract this sort of influence to our lives and to our home. The Spiritist view recognizes spiritual influence and admits that obsessive processes can aggravate states of dependence and psychic disorganization. But obsession does not explain everything, nor does it replace medical or psychological evaluation. Influence is not automatic absolution. There is affinity when thoughts, desires, and habits create resonance with lower spiritual intelligence and environments. Because sometimes when you learn about the obsession process into Spiritism, you may think that they will come and influence you to do bad things or to worsen your condition. But remember, here is saying that we have to be aligned. Thoughts, desires, and habits have to create a resonance between us and the spiritual influences so they can happen. They are not alone. There is a co-responsibility in this subject. Spiritist doctrine does not deny free will, but shows that the will may be temporarily weakened and needs to be re-educated. Passions are not in themselves an absolute evil. They become a problem when they cease to serve life and begin to govern it. The incarnate person is not a mere passive object of external forces. Through their actions, vigilance, and daily choices, they open or close doors. Like I said before, the spirit can come next to you, but it will only enter your mind in a way of speaking because they will not enter for real your body or nothing like that. They will only have a stronger influence on you if you open your mental door, we used to say, which means if you start to be, like we said here, aligned with thoughts resonating with desires, thoughts, and habits. You have to have the same desire as the spirit that is coming close to you in order for him to stay close to you. And we know in the other lecture we made about the spiritual influences that, for example, if you drink one bottle of alcohol to become drunk, the spirit that will only access the ethereal fluid, they will only access the emanations of the alcohol when it evaporates, for example. They will need you to drink two, three, four bottles. And that's why sometimes when you are very dependent on the substance, it becomes worse with an obsession. Then you need not only the psychological or the physical, but also the spiritual help. That's why all of them have to work together. Then here we say that a more mature spiritist perception avoid two extremes. First, blaming only obsessing spirits, or second, blaming only the individual without considering their concrete fragility. Those things are walking together hand by hand. There are lots of factors behind. There are traumas, there are things we bring from other lives and weaknesses that we carry inside that are not weaknesses, actually. They are our fragilities or the parts of ourselves that still need to be worked on, that still need to be fixed by our improvement in our evolution. So we are not blaming people for being weak or not, if this or that. Spiritual help is real, but it must meet cooperation from the person's side, sincerity, and perseverance in good. To free oneself involves restoring inner command, lucidity, and progressive moral discipline. Here there is a piece of text from the book Liberation from the spirit André Luiz. I don't know if they have this book in English, perhaps, but these books are very enlightening. They bring a lot of information through stories and examples that André Luiz gives, and it helps us to understand the situation as if you were watching a movie or learning more from other people's behaviors and lives. Here he says, thought is, without a doubt, a creative force of our own soul, and therefore the continuation of ourselves. Through it, we act in the environment in which we live and work, establishing the pattern of our influence for good or for bad. So we have to watch our thoughts constantly. We have to learn from it. We have to discipline it. It's not like we say, oh, I'm born this way and then I will die this way, or I cannot do better. I don't know better. You have always the choice. The same way as the internet comes to your life as a bad influence, you can search for good influences and you will find it. It depends on you. You have books, you have movies, you have people to talk, you have options to escape the situation of being so alone and not knowing what to do, and you have ways to discipline your thoughts as well. The inner roots of behavior are exactly this. Many dependencies are born from nameless pains, like we said before, loneliness, abandonment, trauma, boredom, guilt, shame, anger, or persistent fear. Others are linked to still undisciplined passions, such as pride, vanity, unrestrained sensuality, desire for power, or systematic escape from effort. All these things are very present in our society. It was always present in all times of history. But now we know much more about this because we have people's lives in display on the social media. And we can see all of these. So you know that the dependencies will born from these pains, and the pains are not only the regular ones we know, like trauma or guilt or things we bring from our childhoods or from other lives, like we said. There are also the parts of our spirits that still need to be uh, detailed, still needs to be overcome, still needs to be understood, like the pride we carry or the desire for power or other things we carry. These are the reflexes from many other lives where we developed this kind of behavior in a society that was very different from the one we live in now. In the Spiritist view, the present life, can dialogue with ancient tendencies of the spirit that may reappear or be reactivated by the circumstances of the current incarnation, functioning at the same time as trial, expiation, and an opportunity for transformation, like we discussed in the lecture about the law of cause and effect. You can see that in this life, we will not be able to deal with all our problems from past lives. We will deal with only a few problems. We are only capable to deal with a few things. So the things that are most evident in our lives now, the difficulties or the dependencies we sleep on, they will tell us about what kind of things we brought from other lives to deal with in this life. In this incarnation, the circumstances that we live in will function as a moment of apprenticeship for us. The trial, the expiation, or the opportunity for transformation. It depends on the level we are. And here Kardec also asks again on the Book of Spirits, in new existences, will the spirit preserve traces of the moral character of previous existences? And they say this may happen, but by improving itself, it changes, which means we will not be stagnated in one kind of behavior. We bring traces, we bring some ways of dealing with things that we develop in other lives. But we always have the choice to improve, to learn and to change. And then we will change the things we will live afterwards. And here, some words of Jesus, which is our best teacher ever. Jesus does not humiliate the fallen. He calls to consciousness, offers mercy, and invites transformation. He doesn't blame people. He doesn't criticize people. He only calls to consciousness. He says, watch and pray. He says, go and don't do this again. That's what we have to learn with him. instead of being punishing people or uh, harboring prejudice or thinking about the problems of the others and why they are falling on that, we have to remember that we don't have the right to humiliate anybody or to judge anybody. We cannot think that people are weak because they chose this way or that way, or because they choose this or that substance or this or that behavior. It's not up to us to judge anybody. We have only to offer the best help we can and start the work with ourselves. We always have lots of things to improve before think about the others. That's why I say self-knowledge makes it possible to identify the triggers, the fragilities, the self-deceptions, and risk contexts that sustain repetition. Self-knowledge. Only when you know yourself better, only when you take time in silence or meditate or think about yourself critically, you can identify your fragilities and risk context. So you say, if I know I like a lot of alcohol and this is difficult for me to resist, then why should I put myself in this context where everybody will drink or offer me drinking a lot? No, I will not. I give up. Or this goes to smoke or to alcohol or to whatever thing that is easier for you to be dependent on. And I don't know what problems which one of us have inside and which things are coming to our lives in the most easier and beautiful way to involve us in this illusion. So why should I criticize? Jesus recommends watch and pray as keys to self overcoming, honesty about oneself, and seek for higher support. Watch, which is vigilance, is pay attention on yourself, means caring for the inner and outer environment, thoughts, company, access, routines, and schedules. This is about you, not about the others. And prayer does not replace effort, but inwardly strengthens those who need to sustain effort over time. Prayer is really something that is very important for us to learn. When offered sincerely, it helps calm the mind, reorganize intention, restore clarity to consciousness, and recover inner balance amid pain, relapse, or temptation. Spiritually speaking, prayer elevates attunement and makes us more receptive to support, inspiration, and higher resources for moral strengthening. Because prayer develops a different frequency. Who studies the light and the colors will know that frequencies, each color, for example, will produce a frequency in hertz. The violet color is the highest one, and the red color is the lowest one. A short, I forgot the words in English sometimes because it's very technical words. Frequency and length of this. Then the red one is the shortest one, and the violet is the longest one. So, spiritually speaking, prayer elevates attunement and makes us more receptive to support, inspiration, and higher resources for moral strengthening. This is because when we uh, move a lot of energy through the prayer, this energy is elevated, and then we are connected to more subtle and elevated energies that will help us to be in balance. Because when you pray, you will be calmer, you will breathe more frequently, and then you will start connecting to higher um, influences from higher spirits. From a scientific perspective, spiritual and contemplative practices can support emotional regulation, stress reduction, and healthier coping. Thus, praying is not fleeing reality nor expecting a magical solution. It is creating within oneself a space of clarity, humility, and hope that helps the person regain direction and persevere in the path of transformation. This is a very important connection we have to remember. Prayer is a spiritual habit, is a spiritual choice. But also prayer, if you don't call with this name and you call this meditation or you call this breathing or you call this grounding, which are modern words for the same thing, you will be quieter, you will be in silence. You will try to shut down the exterior and pay attention to your inner self and connect yourself with the higher spirits. Then you will be in a completely different state, in an alpha state, in a quieter state that will allow you to be more connected to the good things that you seek. And now we talk about the integral treatment, body, mind, and spirit, which we were saying before. We can never treat them separately because we are all connected parts. Spiritual support is valuable, but it must go hand in hand with medicine, psychology, psychiatry, or support groups when necessary. We are never to take for granted the help that medicine can give us and the psychological support can give us. With also the spiritual support, then we are on the right way to heal ourselves. Treat the spirit without abandoning the body. Treat the body without forgetting the soul. This is the axis of an integral approach. The greater the degree of harm, the greater the need for a structured plan, responsible follow up, and a support network. Liberation rarely happens through an isolated emotional impulse, but through daily changes in habits, thoughts, and choices. We sometimes think that we have to be radical. We have to quit smoking or stop drinking or stop whatever we think it's bad immediately. And this is a mistake because for some people it might work, but for most of the people it will not work because it's not an emotional impulse. It's a daily work. It has to come changing your habits and changing your thoughts and changing your choices every day. And you have to remember that you will relapse, you will sleep, you will go back, you will do the same, and then you start again. The most important thing is the constancy of starting again, how many times are necessary, and keep going with this in your head. The Spiritist resources are very powerful. We know that. The prayer, the passes, which is the spiritual healing, the gospel at home, the Spiritist book study, the fraternal counseling, the disobsession when indicated, done in the spiritual center, and service in goodness can strengthen will and hope. All of these elements from Spiritism, these resources will help reorganize your inner life. They will expand consciousness and replace habits of escape with bonds of meaning. Their value grows when they are lived with constancy and integrated with concrete attitudes. So it's not enough only to sit in your house and every week do the gospel at home or open a book and read a page or do a prayer. It's not enough if this is not followed by constancy and integration with your other parts. your attitudes towards others, your attitudes towards people, your relationship, the way you behave in your work, or the way you behave in the traffic. All of these should work together in order to change yourself day by day. This integral treatment has to be connected because the science understands dependencies as a multifactorial disorder involving the brain, the behavior, the environment, and the psychic suffering. Imagine, we are a very complex being, including the spirit, which is living in this physical body. And the World Health Organization advocates for biopsychosocial and integrated strategies for the treatment of substance use disorders. Therefore, it should not be reduced to a lack of will or a moral failure, like many people say. Many times, the person wants to stop and even tries to stop and suffers because they cannot, since the problem also affects the mechanisms of reward, stress, and self-control. Therefore, this condition calls for a broader and more compassionate view. We have to see ourselves as a biological being and a psychological, social, and spiritual being. If dependence affects the body, the mind, the emotions, the bonds, and in the spiritist view, also the spiritual dimension, then care must be equally multiple. Therefore, integrated approaches, medical, psychological, psychosocial, and spiritual, tend to be more effective than isolated solutions. Personal effort remains essential, but it flourishes better when it finds support, which means we cannot think about doing everything alone. We need help. We need to count on other people. We need to count on a support from a doctor or a psychologist in order to be able to restructure our lives and flourish better when we have this support. It's not an easy solution. We cannot do this alone. This does not eliminate personal responsibility, but places it in a true context. The individual is still called to personal effort, which means it's your responsibility, honesty with yourself, and perseverance in change. However, when that effort finds support, proper treatment, welcome, and a network, it develops better, of course. Instead of simplistic judgment, what helps most is the combination of collective compassion and individual commitment. Understand without indulging, sustain without controlling, guide without humiliating. Change rarely happens through imposition or shame. It becomes more possible when the person is seen in their pain, in their dignity, and in their real capacity for reconstruction. So, regular sleep, appropriate exercise, predictable routine, clinical follow up, psychotherapy, and support groups are real instruments of protection. And the concrete steps to overcome these problems: first, recognize without self deception. Naming the problem is the first movement of liberation. You have to admit you have this problem. Then you reduce access, map triggers, strengthen honest bonds, establish small and sustainable goals, and cultivate practices of interiorization. And after relapses, begin again without cynicism or self destruction. Perseverance is worth more than one time heroism. I know very well that these definitions are beautiful on the paper or beautiful in theory, but are really hard to practice. Recognize the problem you have is already the first and most difficult step. Many times we don't recognize we have this problem. And then you have to be very strong to start reducing the access and establishing small and sustainable goals. But you are able to do this when you have help, when you have a psychologist, when you have a doctor, when you have a spiritual orientation, then you are able to start with very small baby steps and then move forward to the real changes. And relapse is a very normal thing, should be not automatically be read as total failure, but as a sign that the process still needs adjustments and support. The danger lies in turning the fall into identity. You can think, I am this and I will never change, but this is not true. The Spiritist view rejects such definitive condemnation. Every passion can be educated. Every victory is linked to continued inner work. And every soul can begin again and again, and how many times it needs, because we are eternal beings and we have all the things in our hands to change in the time we are able to. Nobody will change in the same time frame. Nobody will have the same tools, the same will, or the same conditions around. Some of us are living in countries that don't help us in any way, or some of us are living in difficult financial conditions that we cannot apply for better treatment or have access to better doctors. And some of us have access to all of this but don't have the will. It will all depend on the first steps we take. And here I brought um, a little text from Saint Augustine from the Spiritist book, when they ask him what's the most effective practical means by which man may improve himself or resist evil or change his own life. And he answers that an ancient wise man has told you, know yourself, know or thyself. This is in the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. Know thyself or know yourself. And the second question Kardec did was, we know the full wisdom of this maxim, yet the difficulty lies precisely in each one knowing himself. What is the means of achieving it? And then St. Augustine answered, do as I did when I was on earth. At the end of the day, stop for a few minutes and observe your own conscience. Recall what you lived, what you said, what you felt, and ask yourselves whether you failed to fulfill any duty, whether you hurt anyone, whether you acted with truth or in uprightness. That is how I learned to know myself and to perceive what in me needed to be transformed. Uh, Whoever creates this habit of sincerely reviewing their actions every night, recognizing the good and the evil they have done, and asks God and their guardian angel for clarity to see more clearly, will find great strength to improve themselves. Believe me, God supports those who truly desire to improve. Therefore, ask yourselves, what did I do today? With what intention did I act this or that way? Did I do something I would criticize if someone else had done it? Did I take any action that I would be ashamed to admit? These are very simple questions which will bring you very difficult answers, because many times you just decide or prefer not to see your mistakes. And this is an old way of speaking that is in the book of almost 200 years ago. But today, if you just lay down and think about your day, what you did or what you choose or how you behaved, you will find a way to understand if you have things to improve. And if you want, you can write a journal and answer these questions or take some notes every day. This will help you to clarify your mind. So to close our dialogue today. Not a dialogue, only from my part. Connection between spirits and contemporary references. Kardec emphasizes free will, self knowledge, the education of passions, and moral strengthening. André Luiz, which is another important spirit to us Brazilians, explores mental attunement, psychic vampirization, and spiritual co-responsibility. Current research shows how environment, repetition, and emotional vulnerability modulate behavior. Contemporary literature describes reward circuits, habit, risk, and care strategies. The two perspectives do not need to compete. They can dialogue in an approach that unites responsibility, compassion, complexity, and integral treatment. The Spiritist reference illuminates the moral and spiritual meaning, and the contemporary one helps us understand mechanisms, risk, and evidence-based care, which means we can use both together. We can count on the help from the spiritual cosmology, which is the set of knowledge that Spiritism bring to us. And we can also rely on the knowledge the psychologists will bring to our lives, helping us to think about ourselves or to look inside, to know our inner self better, and to admit our weaknesses, to admit our needs, and face our traumas, our difficulties, and the difficult things we have to overcome. These together will help us to support and to face and to let me stop here. This will help us to overcome the bad habits, the dependencies, and all the difficult things we still find hard to overcome. Now, Christiane, we can stop recording and then people can now start the dialogue. We can discuss and